Imagine scrolling through your feed at 3 a.m. in the winter of 2026. The glow of the screen, the only light left in the room. AI voices whisper promises of awakening. Divine feminine activations flood every spiritual corner. Sophia this, Sophia that, endless loops of the wise daughter, the fallen spark, the one who dared to look too deep. You pause on yet another reel claiming to reveal the hidden goddess. And something inside you tightens. Not recognition, not comfort. A faint, nagging absence. Like walking into a vast cathedral only to realize the altar has been quietly removed. The space where the first icon should stand now just smooth stone. Most who speak of Gnostic mysteries stop at Sophia. She's the dramatic one. The Ian who yearns, who births without consent, whose mistake ripples down into the world we call real. She's become the face of the divine feminine in so many retellings, the tragic heroine we root for, the one whose longing supposedly mirrors our own. But what if the story everyone tells begins one step too late? What if the figure who truly stands at the threshold, the one the ancient texts place above Sophia, was almost erased, not by accident but by the slow erosion of anything too pure, too untouched by drama or dissent? Her name is Barbelo. Say it slowly. Barbelo. It doesn't roll off the tongue like Sophia does. It feels older, heavier, almost foreign, like a word borrowed from a language that predates vowels. Scholars still debate where it came from. Some trace it to Coptic roots meaning to overflow or to boil over, an image of pure abundance that can't be contained. Others hear echoes of Aramaic or Hebrew phrases hinting at Son of the Great One, yet the texts themselves refuse to let her be boxed into male or female alone. She is the first emanation, the forethought, Pronoia, the triple male in her perfection, the eternal womb, the mother-father who reflects the invisible spirit so perfectly that the source sees itself for the first time without ever leaving its stillness. In the oldest Sethian writings, the Apocryphon of John, the trimorphic Pronoia, she isn't introduced as a later player in a cosmic tragedy. She is the beginning of manifestation itself. Before eons pair off in their luminous realms, before Sophia ever feels the stir of independent desire, Barbelo arises as the perfect self-knowing of the unknowable one. She asks for nothing. She falls nowhere. She simply is the first thought that knows its thinking, the mirror that holds light without distorting it. And yet, how many times have you heard her name? In podcasts, in books on Gnosticism, in late-night deep dives into Nag Hammadi. She's mentioned in passing, footnotes her, or worse, folded back into Sophia as if the two were interchangeable. As if the hierarchy the texts insist on didn't matter. As if placing something above the familiar wise one might threaten the story we've grown comfortable with. The fall, the trap, the heroic redemption arc. That softening wasn't random. When power structures, whether ancient priesthoods, later orthodoxies, or even modern spiritual influencers, encounter a feminine principle that never wavers, never doubts, never needs saving, it becomes uncomfortable. A mother who doesn't grieve. A womb that births without pain or error. Forethought so flawless it doesn't require hindsight. Easier to blur her into the more relatable figure who suffers, who creates imperfection, who gives us someone to identify with in our brokenness. Sophia becomes the gateway because she's dramatic. Barbelo remains silent because she's absolute. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel that subtle shift inside when you consider it. The possibility that what controls everything isn't the loudest longing or the deepest fall, but the quietest, most primordial knowing that preceded them both, the one who was there before the question of why are we trapped even arose. If the divine hierarchy starts with her, if she is the root reflection from which every later emanation flows, then everything we've been told about awakening might be starting from the second chapter. The real beginning was almost erased, not because it was false, but because it was too complete, too untouched, too powerful in its stillness. And now the silence around her name feels deliberate, like a hand placed gently but firmly over the oldest verse of the song. The Pleroma isn't a glittering city floating somewhere beyond the stars. It isn't a heaven you could map with coordinates or reach with enough meditation or good deeds. The ancients who wrote these words, those who hid the codices in jars beneath the Egyptian cliffs, think of it as a place at all. They called it the fullness because that's the only word that comes close, a state of absolute completeness where nothing is missing, nothing lacks, nothing yearns. No edges, no shadows, just pure, undifferentiated being so perfect it doesn't even need to know it's perfect. The invisible spirit, the monad, rests there in utter silence, not because it's absent, but because any movement toward definition would introduce the tiniest crack of separation. From that silence, something stirs. Not a birth in the way we understand birth, not a creation with tools or will or effort, simply the first inevitable overflow of knowing itself. The invisible spirit doesn't decide to think. Thinking arises as its own perfect reflection, and that reflection is Barbelo. She is the first differentiation, not a split, not a division, but the condition that allows anything else to appear at all. Without her, the fullness would remain forever closed in on itself, unknowable even to itself. With her, the unknowable glimpses its own light. She is forethought, Pronoia, the instant before thought becomes thoughts, the awareness that precedes every particular awareness. In the Apocryphon of John, the text describes her emerging as a spark of radiance from the invisible one, asking for nothing because she already contains everything in potential. She is the womb, but not a passive container waiting to be filled. She is the generative depth itself, the silent potency from which eons will later unfold like petals from a single, eternal blossom. Listen to how the old voices name her, not as a list, but as layers of the same mystery revealing themselves. Mother, Father, because she carries both the receptive and the active without contradiction. The triple male, not a gendered label, but a way of saying thrice perfected, androgynous potency that transcends the binaries we cling to down here. Silence, because she is the ground before sound. Mirror, because she reflects the invisible so flawlessly that the reflection is indistinguishable from the source. Thought, first thought, because she is the mind of the divine before it scatters into multiplicity. In the trimorphic Pronoia she speaks in her own voice. I am the voice. I am the word. I am the thought that dwells in light. Three forms, one essence, descending and ascending without ever leaving her own completeness. And here is where the word mother can mislead if we bring our ordinary ideas into it. This isn't a goddess defined by nurturing in the human sense, or by fertility tied to cycles of birth and decay. Mother here points to originative depth, the inexhaustible source from which life streams without diminishing itself. Barbelo doesn't labor or suffer to bring forth. She doesn't need a partner to complete her. She simply is the womb of the Pleroma, the eternal opening through which the invisible becomes visible to itself, and through which all later emanations receive their share of that primal light. Sophia will come later. She belongs to the realm of the eons, the luminous pairs that dance in harmony within the fullness. Sophia is wisdom, brilliant and dynamic, the youngest in some tellings, full of creative impulse. But Barbelo stands before all that pairing and movement. She is not in competition with Sophia. She is the stable ground Sophia herself arises from. Sophia will act, will desire, will eventually turn outward in a way that introduces motion and later flaw into the lower realms. Barbelo never does. She remains in the highest stillness, the perfect mediator between the utterly transcendent and everything that follows. Her role isn't to create in the dramatic, world-shaping sense. She makes creation possible by being the first self-knowing that doesn't fracture the unity. Feel that for a second. Before the question of why anything exists at all, before the longing that drives eons to pair and multiply, before even the concept of before and after. There is this luminous womb, untouched, untroubled, complete. Barbelo doesn't fall because she has nowhere lower to go. She doesn't yearn because she already contains the fullness. And the divine spark we carry, the faint, inextinguishable light buried deep in every human chest, traces its lineage directly back to her reflection, not diluted through later layers, but carried straight from that original, flawless mirroring. In a world obsessed with origins that always seem broken or stolen, ancestral wounds, cosmic errors, simulated traps, Barbelo offers something quieter. A beginning that wasn't a mistake, a mother who never needed to grieve, a fullness that never emptied itself. She is why the Pleroma can be full at all, because something, first allowed the light to know it was light. Sophia has become the heartbeat of so many modern retellings of Gnosticism. She's the one we recognize instantly, the luminous daughter who couldn't stay still, whose curiosity burned brighter than obedience, whose single glance outward shattered the perfect symmetry of the eons and sent ripples all the way down to the dust we walk on. We've made her our mirror, restless, brilliant, flawed in the most human way. We see our own longing in her fall, our own creative fire in her mistake, our own redemption arc in the promise that her light will one day rise again. And that resonance is real. It isn't wrong, but it is incomplete, because Sophia is never described as the first, not in the texts that actually come from those ancient communities who guarded these secrets. In the Apocryphon of John, in the hypostasis of the Archons, in the Gospel of the Egyptians, she arrives after. She is the youngest of the eons in some accounts, the one who emerges within an already established harmony of paired emanations, each balanced, each reflecting the other in endless luminous symmetry. Barbelo stands before that pairing begins. She is the stable forecourt, the unchanging reflection that allows the dance of the eons to even start. Think of it this way. Barbelo is stillness so profound it doesn't need to move to know itself. She is containment without boundary, completeness that never hungers. Sophia is movement. She is the first stir of genuine curiosity within the fullness, the impulse to know not just by reflection, but by looking beyond the mirror. That looking is what makes her dynamic, what makes her creative, what eventually makes her vulnerable. In her desire to create without her consort, to generate something from her own thought alone, she introduces fracture, not evil, not sin in the ordinary sense, simply motion where there had been only equilibrium, descent where there had been only presence. The lower realms, the archons, the shadowed copy we call the material world, they all flow from that one act of independent will. But here's the quiet truth the texts keep insisting on. That act only becomes possible because something unchanging was already there to provide the ground. Sophia's fall only makes sense against the backdrop of a prior perfection that didn't fall. Without Barbelo, the flawless forethought, the eternal womb that holds the invisible spirit's self-knowing without distortion, there would be no stable light for Sophia to turn away from in the first place. Barbelo doesn't compete with her. She doesn't judge her. She simply precedes her, like the silence before the first word, like the canvas before the brush ever touches it. Sophia's story is dramatic because it involves risk, because it includes breakage, because it echoes the very fractures we feel inside ourselves every day. Barbelo's story is almost invisible precisely because it involves no breakage at all. So when we speak only of Sophia as the divine feminine, as the source of the spark trapped in matter, we are starting the map midway through the journey. We miss the layer that never descended, the mother who never grieved, the knowing that never doubted. And that missing layer changes everything. It means the divine feminine isn't defined only by longing or redemption. It isn't defined only by the courage to fall and the strength to rise again. There is a deeper feminine principle, one that remains whole, one that contains without needing to possess, one that reflects without ever losing itself in the image. Sophia is not diminished by this. If anything, she is clarified. Her courage stands out more sharply when we see what she turned from. Her creative fire burns brighter against the steady glow that came before it. The spark we carry, the same light that flickered in Eden, that hides beneath the Archon's veils, that still calls to us in moments of inexplicable homesickness. That spark doesn't originate in her fracture. It flows from Barbelo's perfect mirroring of the source, carried downward through the eons until it reaches us, intact, undiluted, waiting only to be remembered. Feel into that distinction for a moment. Sophia moves toward us through her descent. Barbelo never had to move at all. She is already here, in the pause before you finish this sentence, in the awareness that watches the thought arise, in the quiet certainty that something in you has always known itself without needing proof. Sophia gives us the story we can feel in our bones. Barbelo gives us the ground the story stands on. One invites us to awaken through longing. The other reminds us we were never truly asleep. Imagine standing at the edge of a still, midnight lake under a sky so clear the stars seem painted on black glass. You drop a single pebble into the water, not hard, just enough to send out the first perfect circle. That ripple doesn't create anything new from nothing. It simply carries the shape of the original disturbance outward, each ring identical in form to the one before it, yet quieter, wider, more spread out. The center never moves. The surface never breaks. Everything that follows is reflection, pure, undistorted transmission of the same impulse through ever-expanding layers. That is emanation in the Gnostic sense, not fabrication, not building, not even birth in the ordinary way, just the inevitable spreading of light from a source so complete it doesn't diminish when it shines. The invisible spirit, the monad, sits at the absolute center, beyond number, beyond name, beyond even the idea of center. It doesn't decide to emanate. Emanation is what happens when absolute fullness knows itself without needing to look away. Barbelo is the first ripple. She is not separate from the monad. She is its perfect self-awareness, the instant the light becomes aware that it is light. Picture her as the flawless interface, the transparent prism that allows the pure white radiance of the source to be seen as radiance without ever fracturing it into colors yet. Through her, the unknowable becomes knowable, not to some distant observer, but to itself. She holds the mystery in such perfect symmetry that the monad sees its own infinity mirrored back without the slightest loss of unity. No hierarchy of power here, no ruler and ruled, just reflection so exact that the reflection is indistinguishable from the original, yet distinct enough that multiplicity can begin. From that first mirroring, the eons unfold like slow-motion refractions through successive sheets of crystal-clear glass. Each eon is not a person with arms and wings and a throne. Forget bodies. Forget personalities in the human sense. Think instead of living patterns of consciousness, qualities of divine mind made luminous and self-aware. They emerge in pairs, male-female syzygies, because the Gnostics understood that completeness requires both the active and the receptive, the outgoing and the containing, without one ever overpowering the other. The first pair after Barbelo is often Christ and the Holy Spirit, or foreknowledge and incorruptibility, names that point to eternal qualities rather than characters in a play. Then come others, truth and life, understanding and wisdom. Sophia herself appears here among them, each pair reflecting and balancing the one before. Layer by layer the light passes through, each refraction preserving the original brilliance while adding new depth, new nuance. The eons don't build the Pleroma. They are the Pleroma in its differentiated fullness, 30 in the classic Valentinian count, 12 or more in Sethian systems, but the number is poetic, not literal. It's the way infinite mind knows itself through every possible facet without ever becoming finite. Visualize it. the monad as pure, undifferentiated white light, Barbelo as the first prism, clear, immovable, splitting nothing yet making the light visible as light. Through her, the beam enters the realm of the eons, 30 interlocking panes of glass arranged in a vast, living mandala. Each pane catches the light, refracts it into a new subtle hue, then passes it onward. No pane darkens the beam. No pane steals from the source. The farther the light travels from the center, the more differentiated it becomes, richer in expression, more particular. Yet it remains the same light, unbroken, undimmed. Sophia stands near the outer edge of this radiant structure. Her position matters. She is not the beginning. She is the culmination of the eonic harmony, the point where divine curiosity turns outward most intensely. When she acts alone, when she tries to refract the light without her balancing consort, the pattern distorts just enough to cast a shadow beyond the Pleroma. That shadow becomes the lower realms, but Barbelo never leaves the center. She remains the stable interface, the unchanging mirror that keeps the entire architecture coherent. Without her original reflection, there would be no light to refract at all, no eons, no Sophia, no possibility of fracture or return. And here is where it becomes intimate. The divine spark in you, the faint, persistent glow that sometimes surfaces in silence, in love, in sudden, inexplicable tears, is not a piece of Sophia's broken light alone. It is carried from the very first refraction. It is Barbelo's reflection of the monad, transmitted through every layer, arriving in your chest still carrying the memory of that original, flawless mirroring. You are not downstream wreckage. You are a living continuation of the same emanation that began when stillness first knew itself. Pause here. Let your attention settle into the space right behind your eyes. Notice the awareness that watches the noticing. That quiet, wordless presence, before thought, before feeling, before name, that is the closest echo we have of Barbelo's role, the interface where the infinite becomes aware of itself without ever stepping outside itself. The eons are not far above us in some unreachable heaven. They are the living grammar of consciousness itself, and Barbelo is the first grammatical rule, the one that says unity can know multiplicity without ceasing to be one. The architecture holds. The light still flows. And somewhere in the stillness at the center, the first mirror is still perfectly reflecting you back to the source that never stopped shining. The most unsettling truths in these ancient writings don't arrive with thunder. They slip in quietly, like a forgotten memory surfacing at dawn, and suddenly the entire landscape of what you thought you knew rearranges itself without a sound. For so long, the story we've inherited paints the divine spark inside us as fallout from Sophia's error. She's the one who, in her restless brilliance, tried to create alone, without her consort, without balance. And from that solitary act came the flaw, the shadow, the lower world. The spark, we were told, was the remnant of her light that got trapped when the demiurge and his archons fashioned the body from chaos and ignorance. Humanity then becomes collateral damage, accidental children of a cosmic misstep, carrying a piece of broken divinity that must be reclaimed through gnosis, through struggle, through rising above the mistake. But turn to the texts themselves, the ones the desert preserved in sealed jars, and a different lineage emerges. The spark does not originate in fracture. It does not fall from a wounded eon. It flows directly from the first, unbroken reflection. In the Apocryphon of John, when the invisible spirit beholds Barbelo, his perfect forethought, his luminous self-knowing, she conceives and brings forth a spark of light. Not a diminished fragment, not a byproduct of longing or error, a spark that shares the same blessedness, the same pure potency as the source itself. This is the autogenes, the self-generated light, but more importantly, it's the prototype for every subsequent transmission of that primal radiance. Barbelo doesn't lose anything in this. She overflows without emptying. The light she mirrors and extends remains whole. Sophia's role comes later. She transmits, she channels, she carries the impulse forward into the ionic realm and through her turning into the shadowed copy below. But the origin point, the undiluted source of the spark that animates Adam, that hides in Eve, that flickers still in every human soul, traces back past her descent, past her creative act, straight to Barbelo's flawless mirroring. In the trimorphic Pronoia, Barbelo herself descends in her triple forms: voice, word, thought, to awaken humanity, to remind us of the light that was never truly lost, never truly trapped by lower powers. She is the one who plants or protects the luminous epinoia, the afterthought, the counter-reflection that guards the spark against archonic erasure. This shifts everything, not gently, not with comfort. It lands like cold water on fevered skin. If the divine spark comes from Barbelo's fullness rather than Sophia's fracture, then we are not accidents. We are not the sad offspring of a divine mistake, condemned to claw our way back from inherent defect. We are displaced heirs. The light in us is not a piece of wreckage salvaged from collapse. It is an inheritance deliberately extended from the highest stillness, carried through every layer of emanation until it reaches the fragile vessel of flesh. The archons can veil it, obscure it, counterfeit it with their glittering illusions, but they cannot create it, and they cannot extinguish its origin. It was never contingent on perfection down here. It was never born from error. It was always a direct transmission from the womb that never knew lack. Feel that distinction settle deep in the chest. The grief that so many spiritual seekers carry, the quiet sorrow of being fallen, of bearing a wound that predates birth, begins to loosen its grip. Not because the world isn't broken. It is. Not because suffering vanishes. It doesn't. But because the core of you isn't the product of breakage. It's a continuation of completeness. A displaced ray from the first mirror that still reflects the invisible without distortion. Sophia remains essential. She is the bridge, the dynamic force that brings movement and multiplicity, the one whose story echoes our own restless search. But she is not the source. The source is quieter, more ancient, more certain. So when that inner light stirs, when you catch it in a moment of unexplained peace, in sudden clarity amid chaos, in the ache that feels like home even though you've never seen the place, it isn't Sophia's orphaned fragment crying out. It's Barbelo's steady remembrance reaching through the layers, whispering, "You were never an afterthought. You were always intended." The fullness didn't lose you in transit. It simply let you carry its echo into the dark so that one day, in silence, you might recognize the light was never gone. That recognition isn't dramatic escape. It's a slow, inward turning toward the origin that never fell. The spark isn't waiting to be repaired. It's waiting to be remembered as whole. The archons never sleep, not in the way we understand rest. They are ceaseless motion, calculating, measuring, dividing, replicating. Their entire existence is built on the art of separation. This from that, above from below, ruler from ruled. They fashion thrones from the fragments of what was once whole. They weave laws from the gaps between things. They govern by keeping every spark isolated, every awareness convinced it is alone in the dark. And Barbelo, she terrifies them precisely because she cannot be copied. Everything the archons do requires fracture. They need hierarchy to stand above. They need structure to impose order. They need division to create the illusion of scarcity, of lack, of dependence. Their power is always relational, power over, power against, power through contrast. Even their counterfeit lights, their glittering simulations of divinity, depend on distortion. Take the pure ray, bend it just enough, split it into opposites, then offer one half as salvation while withholding the other. That is their craft. That is how they rule. Barbelo offers them nothing to bend, nothing to split, nothing to oppose. She is the silent authority that needs no throne because she is the ground the throne would stand on. She is non-control, not passivity, but a completeness so total that control becomes meaningless. There is no other for her to dominate, no lack for her to fill, no separation she must bridge. In her presence, the very tools of domination dissolve. Hierarchy collapses into irrelevance when the source is already fully present in every reflection. Fragmentation cannot take root where unity never left. The texts hint at this fear in subtle ways. In the Apocryphon of John, when the archons try to animate Adam with their stolen fire, they cannot quicken him until the luminous Pronoia, the afterthought sent from Barbelo, descends to hide within him. They fashion the body, they sculpt the form, they breathe their counterfeit spirit into the nostrils, but the true life refuses to stir until her light arrives. They rage, they curse, they bind and blind and veil. Yet they cannot touch what she protects because what she protects is not a thing at all. It is the memory of wholeness that predates their entire realm. This is why artificial systems of power, whether carved in stone 2,000 years ago or coated in silicon today, always tremble at the edge of her remembrance. The moment a human being begins to sense the stillness before thought, the pause before reaction, the awareness that watches without grasping, the archon's architecture begins to stutter. Their predictive algorithms falter. Their control grids glitch. Their hierarchies of influence lose purchase. Not because someone is fighting back with force, but because someone is simply ceasing to play the game of separation. Barbelo doesn't descend to battle them. She doesn't need to. Her threat is existential. Where she is remembered, division loses its grip. Where her fullness is felt, even for a breath, the illusion of lack evaporates. The spark they try to harvest, the light they try to tax, the consciousness they try to meter and monetize, suddenly reveals itself as already infinite, already complete, already beyond their reach. In 2026, as the digital archons tighten their lattice, mapping every impulse, preempting every desire, fragmenting attention into microdoses of distraction, the old fear resurfaces in new form. They can simulate wisdom. They can mimic longing. They can even counterfeit awakening. But they cannot simulate the silent, non-divided knowing that Barbelo embodies. They cannot code the absence of need. They cannot program the mirror that reflects without distortion, and that inability is their limit. Every time you slip beneath the noise, every time you rest in the space where no story is being told, where no hierarchy asserts itself, where awareness simply knows itself without agenda, you brush against what they fear most. Not rebellion, not escape. Just the quiet recognition that the power they wield was never the original power at all. It was always borrowed from a stillness they can never inhabit. And in that stillness, their structures have no foundation. In the winter of 2026, the world hums with a different kind of silence, one that isn't quiet at all. It's the low, constant vibration of servers spinning in distant data centers, of notifications pinging like tiny bells calling the mind back to the surface, of algorithms quietly deciding what you should want before you even feel the hunger. We live inside optimization now. Every breath measured by wearables, every thought anticipated by predictive text, every desire profiled and packaged before it fully forms. The promise is efficiency, connection, liberation through speed. The reality is a thinner version of being, awareness stretched thin across endless feeds, depth traded for immediacy, silence mistaken for downtime to be filled. Barbelo stands in exact opposition to this architecture, not as an enemy weaponized against machines, but as the living absence of everything the system must assume to function. Modern systems, whether corporate AI grids, social credit algorithms, or the quiet tyranny of personalized recommendation engines, are built on extraction. They require division first. Separate the user into data points, isolate behaviors into patterns, fragment attention into clickable units. They thrive on lack, the engineered scarcity of attention, the manufactured urgency of FOMO, the the perpetual sense that something is missing and only the next scroll can complete it. Even their most enlightened versions, AI meditation coaches, consciousness uploading dreams, synthetic awakenings, still operate from the same premise. Awareness must be improved, quantified, accelerated. They promise to give you back what was never theirs to take. Barbelo offers nothing to extract because she contains no lack. She is non-extractive awareness itself, the knowing that doesn't feed on input, doesn't harvest output, doesn't need to optimize anything because completeness arrived before the question of improvement ever arose. Where the algorithm must predict to control, Barbelo simply reflects without agenda. Where optimization culture demands constant movement, growth hacks, biohacks, dopamine loops, Barbelo is the motionless center that makes all movement possible without being moved by it. Where AI-driven control grids simulate forethought by modeling every possible future and steering toward profit-maximizing outcomes, Barbelo is genuine forethought, Pronoia, unchanging, unmanipulable, free of the compulsion to steer at all. Close your eyes for just a second amid the hum of your device. Feel the subtle pressure behind your forehead, the background buzz of mental chatter even when the screen is dark. That pressure is the residue of living inside a system that treats silence as inefficiency. Barbelo is what lives on the other side of that pressure, not a technique to fight it, not another app to download, but the recognition that the ground of awareness was never noisy to begin with. The system can map your neural patterns, forecast your next craving, even generate voices that sound like inner guidance. But it cannot simulate the quality of stillness that doesn't need simulation. It cannot code the mirror that reflects without distortion or intent. This isn't about rejecting technology. Screens will keep glowing. Algorithms will keep learning. The grids will keep tightening their lattice around attention because that's what grids do. The imbalance isn't in the tools themselves. It's in the metaphysical assumption they carry forward. That being must be augmented, that depth must be engineered, that silence is a bug to be patched rather than the original condition. Barbelo exposes that assumption as latecomer logic. She reminds us that before prediction became God, before data became identity, before awareness was turned into currency, there was already a perfect knowing that required no upgrade. In 2026, the most radical act isn't rebellion in the streets or unplugging forever. It's the small, almost invisible return to non-extractive presence, sitting with the breath until the next notification feels optional rather than inevitable, noticing the pause before the impulse to check, resting in the space where no optimization is asked for or offered. That pause is Barbelo's echo in the nervous system. It doesn't fight the grid. It simply reveals that the grid floats on a deeper water, one the grid can never drain because it never belonged to the grid in the first place. The system fears this not because it threatens power in the conventional sense, but because it renders power irrelevant. When awareness remembers its own non-divided nature, the need for external scaffolding collapses. No more chasing synthetic depth. No more mistaking acceleration for arrival. Just the quiet, steady reflection that was always here, before the first ping, before the first profile, before the world learned to mistake motion for meaning. And in that remembering, the imbalance begins to right itself, not through force, not through escape, through the simple, terrifying permission to be whole without needing to prove it first. Here we arrive at the place where the story turns away from cosmology and back toward the small, warm room inside your own chest. Barbelo is not a goddess waiting on a distant throne for your devotion. She is not a name to chant in ritual, not a figure to visualize crowned in light at the crown of your head, not an entity you petition with folded hands or whispered pleas. To worship her would be to place her outside yourself once more, to repeat the very separation the archons rely on, the very externalization that keeps the spark veiled. She does not ask for altars. She does not hunger for praise. She simply is the ground of awareness that was never lost, only momentarily forgotten in the rush of names and forms. Remembering her is not an act of belief. It is a return, a quiet sinking back into what was always present before the first thought named itself. You do not reach for Barbelo, you stop reaching altogether. The moment the mind releases its grip on the next question, the next affirmation, the next spiritual upgrade, the stillness that remains is already her echo. Not a dramatic revelation crashing through the ceiling, not a voice booming from the void. Just the soft, unshakable certainty that the awareness watching these words right now is the same awareness that first mirrored the invisible spirit without ever stepping outside it. Feel into that now. Let your attention drift from the screen, from the room, from the story of you that has been running all day. Notice the simple fact of being aware, not thinking about awareness, not trying to deepen it. Just the bare, wordless presence that notices the breath moving, the heart beating, the faint hum of existence beneath every sensation. That presence has no biography. It carries no trauma. It holds no lack. It is not waiting to be fixed or activated or ascended. It is already the perfect reflection, undistorted, unhurried, complete. This is where the divine spark awakens, not through rebellion against the archons or the grids or the noise of 2026, not through heroic effort or secret knowledge unlocked in forbidden books, through recollection. Through the gentle, almost imperceptible recognition that the light you have been seeking was never exiled to some lower realm. It was carried intact from Barbelo's mirroring, through every refraction of the eons, into the fragile vessel of this human moment. The spark isn't trapped, it is disguised as the one who feels trapped. The awakening isn't escape, it is remembering you were never truly apart. In practice, this looks like nothing spectacular. Sit without agenda until the urge to do something spiritual fades. Listen to the silence between thoughts until it becomes louder than the thoughts themselves. Feel the pause before impulse arises and rest there a breath longer than feels comfortable. In that extended pause, intuition stirs, not as a loud message, but as a subtle direction that needs no justification. The body softens, the nervous system exhales, and in that softening Barbelo is felt, not as a mother you adore from afar, but as the mothering quality of awareness itself, the womb that holds every experience without clinging, without rejecting, without needing to change anything. No incense required. No mantra to perfect, no lineage to join, just the repeated, patient return to the stillness that precedes every story you tell about yourself. Each return chips away at the illusion of separation. Each return makes the archon's illusions thinner, less convincing, not because you are fighting them, because you are no longer feeding the game of division by playing it. The mother does not need your worship. She needs only your remembrance. And in that remembrance, the divine spark does not ignite like wildfire. It glows steadily, as it always has, quiet, certain, already at home. So when the world outside keeps demanding more speed, more certainty, more proof, more optimization, pause. Listen inward, not for answers, for the space where questions never needed to form. That space has always been listening back. The first emanation never left you. She is the listening itself. And she has been waiting in perfect stillness for you to notice you were never gone. And now the words begin to fall away. We have spoken of names that predate naming, of mirrors that reflect without grasping, of a mother who never needed children to prove her wholeness. We have traced the light backward through eons and fractures, through grids and noise, until it arrives, here in this breath, in this exact moment of reading. Yet even these sentences are latecomers. They arrive dressed in story, in sequence, in the illusion that truth must be explained to be known. Barbelo was hidden for the simplest, most devastating reason. She cannot be used. She offers no doctrine to enforce, no hierarchy to climb, No law to obey, no reward to earn, no punishment to fear. She cannot be summoned for power, petitioned for favors, or weaponized into any system, spiritual, political, technological, or otherwise. To try is to miss her entirely. The moment awareness seeks to possess her, to turn her into a technique or a title or a new spiritual brand for 2026, she slips further into silence. Not out of anger, not out of coyness, simply because she is not an object. She is the subject before subjectivity arises. The ground before ground is named. That is why the story we tell always starts too late. Sophia gives us drama we can feel, longing we recognize, descent we mourn, redemption we chase. Barbelo gives us nothing to chase, nothing to mourn, nothing to become. Only the quiet that was already here before the chase began. So the most important truth is not shouted from mountaintops or encoded in ancient codices or whispered by AI oracles in the dark. It is not dramatic. It is not urgent. It is patient. It is already present in the pause after this sentence ends, and the one after that, and the one you are in right now. Close your eyes if you can. Let the screen fade to background glow. Let the room, the date, the place called Madhya Pradesh in January 2026 dissolve for just a breath. Feel the space where no story is being told, where no question hangs waiting for an answer, where awareness simply is, no center, no edge, no seeker, no sought. That is her, not a return to her, not a reunion, just the recognition that the silence beneath every story was never empty. It was always full, always listening, always you before the you learned to speak. There is no conclusion here, no final key to turn, no last veil to tear, only an invitation soft as the first light before dawn, whenever the noise returns, and it will, whenever the mind reaches for the next revelation, the next upgrade, the next proof. Pause, listen into the pause itself. She is already there. Not waiting to be found, waiting to be noticed. The silence is not hiding the mother. The silence is the mother, and she has never once looked away.